Mike's on Mike, a conversation about politics, government, and Jacksonville, with 50-year opinion leaders Mike Hightower, Mike Tolbert, and award-winning broadcaster and longtime political observer, Mike Miller.
Welcome to another edition of Mike's on Mike. I'm Mike Miller with my colleagues Mike Tolbert and Mike Hightower, and as always, we start the program with gratitude to Alan Bliss and the fine folks at the Jacksonville Historical Society located in the Jacksonville History Center. This essential organization helps the people of Jacksonville preserve and share this big, complicated city's many fascinating stories. Learn more at jackshistory.org. Thank you for your support of Mike's on Mike. Less than a month ago, Politico magazine published a lengthy, in-depth article about Jacksonville's Susie Wiles, currently at the side of Republican presidential nominee, or presumptive nominee, and former President Donald Trump. The article is entitled The Most Feared and Least Known Political Operative in America. Our guest today wrote, Wiles is not just one of Trump's senior advisors, she's the most important advisor. She's been, in essence, the chief of staff for the last 3 years. Michael Kruse is a senior staff writer at Politico and Politico magazine. He's also a multi-award-winning journalist who's been recognized for his coverage of President Donald Trump and Congress. He's currently writing a book on the infamous Hanging Chad's 2000 presidential election, and I can't wait for that one. Michael lives in North Carolina with his wife, 2 daughters, 3 dogs, a cat, and a fish. There you go. I was going to ask him if he knew all their names, but I'll wait for that on that. Michael, welcome to Mike's on Mike. As a matter of transparency, we must say this, all 3 of us Mikes were quoted in the article.
Michael Kruse, thank you for coming and joining us today, all the way from North Carolina. The 3 of us know Susie Wiles. We've worked with her. Mike Hightower and I have also worked against her. She's in Jacksonville. She's worked and advised Congressman Tilden Fowler, Mayor John Deland, and Mayor Payton, and a host of other Republicans. But my question to you is, why Susie Wiles? What caused you to turn your attention and your Thomas to Susie Wiles for this hell of a story?
Thank you for having me. The short answer to that question is she's the right combination of interesting and important right now. And she is very, very important. She is, as you mentioned, and as I wrote in the piece, the most important advisor to arguably the most important political figure of our time, certainly the most consequential political figure of our time. And so that, by definition, makes her extremely important. I think more broadly, she has such a long arc in her political life that is worth exploring on its own. She started working in politics in the late 70s. So if you're trying to understand how the Republican Party has gone from Reaganism to Trumpism, her own experience, her own story arc is a lens through which to think about that and learn about that. And so it was a no-brainer. I mean, really, this is something I could have done, maybe should have done even earlier.
Well, you did make an amendment story, and there's no question about that. I would hung the shoestrings of what you wrote. Tell me, how long did it take you to write this article? It was pretty damn long. How many people did you interview? And I'm curious to know that the people readily waiting to talk to you on the record, they say glowing things about Susie, but wouldn't say anything in the record that may be critical.
I ended up talking to north of 100 people for this piece. I told probably a couple dozen of those folks I talked to 3, 4, 5 times. Just kept going back. Here's what I've learned. I've learned a little bit more. Here's how I'm thinking, bouncing ideas off of the people within those 100 people who were particularly helpful to me in trying to unpack and understand Susie and what makes her tick. All told, that probably took me a couple months, 2.5 months or so. And then over the last several weeks is when I really started to try to pull it together, think about how I needed to structure this. What is the shape of this piece? Certainly, it was a unusually frustrating at times reporting this story, just given the amount of people who had lots of interesting thoughts about Susie, lots of interesting things to say, but for in many cases understandable reasons did not want to have their names attached to those thoughts. But the balance of those conversations, on the record, off the record, background, all added up to my understanding and my sort of theory of the case toward the end of the process that I'm able to prosecute in the piece.
Listen, Michael, it's just the four of us, so why don't you just go ahead and let us know who are those people that you want to talk to?
We won't tell anybody.
We won't. You can whisper it into your microphone. You won't go any further than just the four of us.
It's just the three mics.
Scout's honor.
Yeah.
Those are. I don't even share those things with my wife. So the
cat or the fish.
Not here. Not with her, and not with even the esteemed three mics on Mics on Mike.
One, Mike, welcome to Three Mics, and appreciate you being here. And for the record, as you already know, I'm a 40-year friend and supporter of Susie Wiles. So let's just, for the record, go ahead and put that there. And there was no, as you know,
then why'd you say all those bad things in the article?
Well, because I was talking to this Mike.
Oh, okay.
Not you guys. Anyway, Mike, it's not unusual for political consultants to seek the spotlight, as we know. You're looking at three of them. Apparently, Susie Wiles is not one of them. Thus, the title of your article. Why those in Jacksonville and across Florida know Susie has been an incredible, successful political influencer at high levels for decades. We all know that. However, it's like she sneaked up on the rest of America. But for some reason, things often don't work out for her. She is credited with both Rick Scott and Ron DeSantis come from behind winning campaigns to become, both of them, Florida's governor, as well as Trump's 2016 win to become president by her successfully coordinating the November campaign in both Florida and Iowa. Many people to this day say DeSantis would not have become governor if it had not been for Susie Wiles. I'm one of them. But then things went off the rails with all three of these men. Then DeSantis, in a very mean-spirited, petty, and very cruel manner, fired her from his staff, the state Republican Party, and then pressured Tallahassee consultant Brian Ballard to fire her as her primary D.C. consultant, and then told Trump he should get rid of her because she was a bad person. To make matters worse, DeSantis did this in the most public, humiliating manner possible. DeSantis did his best to make her politically radioactive, which then threatened her professional reputation and her personal livelihood. Mike, you wrote that she told you, "It was so traumatic for me. I feared for everything, my reputation, my livelihood, my ability to have a livelihood." Mike, walk us through all of that and that conversation you had with her.
So, as I think everybody who follows politics even a little bit in Florida and beyond at this point knows, she was riding high coming out of the 2018 gubernatorial cycle because she had come in fairly late, really late in that election cycle, helped Ron DeSantis beat Andrew Gillum by a very small margin, just got him across the finish line. She got and deserved a lot of that credit. A variety of reasons that are outlined in the story and to some extent are still somewhat murky and not agreed upon, shall we say, by the various combatants. Things fell apart in DeSantis land, in Tallahassee, for not just Susie, but a lot of young up-and-coming politicos who affiliate themselves with and feel very loyal to Susie for a host of reasons. And so when the then quite ascendant Governor Ron DeSantis not only got rid of her, but as you remind us, made it quite public and tried to make it hurt in ways that a lot of people, not even Susie friends necessarily, felt disproportionate, if nothing else. She was questioning, and before I heard it from her, I heard it certainly from people around her, people who had conversations with her at that time, in late 19 and into early 2020, she was questioning whether or not she could bounce back from this. I mean, one of the things that has been a hallmark of her career, among other things on this list, is her ability to sort of survive, to spin out of situations that would stall or even kill other careers within politics. This seemed like potentially a fatal setback for politically speaking. Not only was she on the outs with the then very powerful governor of Florida, the man thought to be at the time the favorite to be the 2024 Republican presidential nominee. But because of that, not unrelated to that, Donald Trump himself and Brian Ballard, to varying degrees and for varying amounts of time, also distanced themselves from Susie. What Susie had working for her, though, was, I think, in some sense, the fruits of her long career in politics, the way she has developed networks, long lists of people who feel not just affinity for her, but great loyalty toward her, for her. And I think proved harder than Governor DeSantis and his allies perhaps thought it would be to snuff her out, so to speak. You need help. You need people. You need other people to not give her a second chance. Ultimately, of course, the person who gave her her next chance, the biggest next chance, was Donald Trump himself, who at some point just decided, I need to win Florida more than I need to continue to placate Ron DeSantis. By that time, of course, I think it wasn't just a Susie thing, it was a Donald Trump thing too, who saw that Ron DeSantis was going to run against him, which he clearly perceived to be an act of disloyalty, if not outright betrayal. So his incentives are starting to change there too. Invites Susie back into the fold to run his 2020 efforts in the state of Florida. She did so. She did successfully. The only swing state, Florida at that time was considered a swing state, the only swing state that he won in that election in which he lost. And so that rekindled that relationship that he had had with Susie for years before that. And that led to steadily her role now. Shortly after January 6th, she is back running his post-presidential political operation out of Mar-a-Lago, out of her house in Ponte Vedra. And that one thing led to another, and here she is de facto campaign manager, is de facto chief of staff, the most important, most influential advisor to the man who might be president again.
What do you think her role has been? Because I understand that she's very active in helping President Trump find a running mate for 24. And she's, from what I understand, leading that effort. What is she going to be able to bring to that? What do you think she's looking for in order to recommend to the former president that this is a person that you really should strongly consider for this position?
I mean, I should say at the outset, I'm not currently reporting on those efforts. So, I only know what I know, and I certainly don't know what I don't know. I think generally speaking, she has been quite adept, more adept at literally anybody else since, in my estimation, since Donald Trump came down the escalator to announce his first presidential run, at managing him without managing him, by which I mean guiding him, but guiding him in a way that he doesn't feel like she's telling him what to do. I can't overstate how clear-eyed she is about the fact that he will do ultimately what he will do.
You wrote that she tried to make herself indispensable, like just about every other political consultant I've ever known. And you also wrote that you were told by some people that Susie has a need to be needed. Tell us about that.
This need to be needed has manifested itself in the estimation of many who've known her and watched her in a particular way. She goes about serving, trying to be a very important cog in somebody's political operation. To be the most important person to the most important person, right, is one way another person I talked to put it. So whether that is John Delaney or John Payton in Jacksonville, or Rick Scott running in 2010 to be governor, or Donald Trump now, the idea is to put herself in that position. Now, she does not necessarily see it this way. She wants to be certainly important. She wants to be a help, but the idea that there's this sort of pathological need to be needed, I don't know that she would go that far, but the pattern of behavior is there, and certainly people around her, many people around her at various stages along the way have identified this as something that makes her stick out, even in the context of a profession, which, as you say, there are many people who want to be close to power, proximity to power, be important to the important person.
You know, Michael, when I was publishing Inside Sales and John Grun was mayor and Simsian was at his side, she was a really good source for me. And I don't know what you learned about her use of information, including links, as a way to have power. Tell us how she may start fires at the end and put them out or let them burn.
This is another way in which this story was a real challenge, was both fascinating but also frustrating. How to describe how somebody uses information, how somebody leverages information, sort of a hard thing to do. It was a hard thing for people to describe to me. It was, in some cases, a hard thing for me to describe to my reader. But one, it's something that a lot of people do, not just in politics. The leveraging of information, the leveraging of relationships. This describes at least a soft power portion of a lot of professions, right? But in politics and in the world of Susie Wiles, what I heard from many people across years and decades and different principals and administrations and campaigns, that she is very easy to talk to. She's as you all know, she is an affable, interesting conversationalist. That leads naturally to the exchange of information. Susie tells things to people, people tell things to Susie. So now Susie knows these things, and pieces of information can be used even after the course of many, many years to advance certain goals or aims, both good and bad. And this is something, in the estimation of many, that she is really, really good at.
You know, Michael, in the early stages of that race, I had dinner with Mayor Payton one night, and he observed that DeSantis would really day that he fired Susie Wiles and did what he did. And I think you just told us that John Payton was correct.
Right. And so, it's so interesting because in the course of my reporting, people around Susie now, people who used to work for or within the administration of Ron DeSantis, now work around for Susie Wiles and Donald Trump. Those are people who will say, Susie didn't do this, Susie didn't do that. She didn't tell us to do this or tell me to do that. But the point is, she doesn't have to. It's sometimes much more indirect than that. Her influence, her understanding, there's sort of the mind meld, the ambient knowledge of what to do and roughly how is a pattern, is an MO, is a thing that people who've been around Susie have come to understand, have come to recognize. And so when certain things start to happen over the course of that 12 plus months in which the trajectories of Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump almost are inverted, right? You have Donald Trump listing a little bit coming out of the 2022 midterms, and Ron DeSantis getting ready to for takeoff, and yet here we are where Ron DeSantis is back in Tallahassee licking his wounds, and Donald Trump, while he has many challenges right now, legal and otherwise, very well could be elected president again. And that is not unrelated to the ways of Susie Wiles, say many who are familiar with those ways.
Yeah, picking up on what Mike Tolbert and John Payton said, there's an old political adage, which Mike Tolbert and I have been doing this now 50 some odd years, be careful, if you're going to, nothing worse than a wounded king. And you said the loyalty. And I will tell you, I'm one of those people. But there's a lot of people out there. There's an old political adage that says, all tracks are round and paybacks are hell. And the fact is, it was so public and so humiliating when it didn't have to be, but he did. In the article, Mike, you indicated as you interviewed people, many had what you called earnest inquiries of you. Why is she working for him? And why does it seem it's working so well? So as you were interviewing, I think you got the idea you were being interviewed. So how'd you respond to that?
I mean, my response to those questions was, well, let me try to figure it out. In some ways, that's where I want to be as a reporter, certainly at a certain stage of the process of putting together a piece like this. I don't want it to be me asking questions and receiving answers. I want it to be much more of a conversation. I want it to be sort of almost a group effort to try to get to an answer. And in some points along the way, I want it to be a group effort to even get the questions. Like what is actually at hand here? What are the questions first before I even try to answer those questions? And so this in this very direct way was an extreme version of a thing I experience almost with every story I do, where in the course of my reporting efforts, I'm hearing questions from other people that then I need to go out and try to answer. Because if even people who know her, if even people who know politics and know Florida politics really, really well, and not just Republicans, Democrats too. In some conversations I had even more so with Democrats, a sense of awe at what she's been able to do, particularly in the last decade plus, but over the course of 4 decades of a life in politics. How did she do this? What is it about her? Democrats who've lost races to her, who've watched from afar, what is it about her that makes her do this, and what makes the way she is work so well, or to this point work so well with a guy who sort of has been famously hard to get along with when you're in that seat of being the most important or a most important advisor.
My father used to have a question he would always ask me when I was getting in trouble, and he said, "What makes you tick?" You could almost write a book called "What Makes Susie Wiles Tick."
At the risk of gross overgeneralization, that is the very broad question that I enter every story with. What makes this person tick? Most cliche, but seriously, why is somebody doing what they're doing? How does somebody do it well? This is not a question of politics. It's a question of people. The way I envision my job at this point, I've been at Politico for 9.5 years now, which is hard to believe, but I need to understand the politics, and I need to hopefully understand the politics in some sophisticated way, because I do, after all, work for a place called Politico. But more than even that, I want to write about the people who do politics, who are involved in politics. Why? What are they doing? Why are they doing it? I mean, that is the goal of profile work, of that genre of journalism. So I'm trying to marry sort of the understanding of politics. The readers of Politico obviously are more interested in politics and policy than maybe the average general interest reader, but all sorts of readers, millions of people who come to Politico, and I at least aim on my best days to serve both that deep interest in politics, but also just a more universal interest in our fellow human beings. what do they do and why?
Yeah. You interviewed her at Starbucks in Palm Beach, which is close to Mar-a-Lago. Was it hard to get her to talk to you? I mean, did you have to try to convince her to sit down and talk, or was she welcoming this? How did that come about?
Welcoming is not a word I'd use. Obviously, it's a little... not a little. It is unusual for her to have engaged in this kind of piece in this way. There have been previous efforts to profile her. The New York Times did one a year and a half or a couple of years ago. She did not talk to them for that, at least not on the record. CNN in 2022, same thing. There was one in NBCnews.com not too long ago, earlier this year, I want to say. And she did have some comments on the record there, although they mostly were in praise of the man for whom she works. So I think it is fair to say that she had not, at least in this political context, in her current context, she had not talked on the record in this way about these things. In particular, her backstory with her father, Pat Summerall, with his struggles with alcohol abuse, and how that affected her.
You know, that Michael, that one of the most interesting things to me about the article is how she talked about the influence and impact of her parents, like you said, especially her dad, Pat Summerall. Tell us, take us inside that conversation with Susie. How did she describe the impact her dad had on her and her mother as well, but especially her dad?
Certainly, she was responding to, in our conversations, to, I suppose, my questions about that were themselves response to my reporting with lots of others and my reading. The first thing I did for this piece basically was read Pat Summerall's memoir, in which he is very upfront with about the ways he struggled and was absent as a father and regretted it deeply and tried to make up for it in the latter decades of his life when he became sober. I mean, Pat Summerall, is the one who should have put this first in the public record. And so anybody who's willing to buy off Amazon used Pat Summerall's memoir has the beginning of an understanding of what it was like to be young Susie Summerall.
Mike Kruse, thank you. Unbelievable. I think I now understand why you are an award-winning journalist. I don't think I've ever heard anybody who have this. It's extraordinary. Thank you. One last question. What are your 3 takeaways of doing this article with Susie Wiles?
People are complicated. People are complicated, and I don't say that in a bad way. People are complicated. That's to say that they're interesting, and she is. She's quite interesting and quite complicated. I mean, I think the other thing, I don't know about 3 takeaways, but I mean, people are going to also see what they want to see. Is one reason I hesitate to list takeaways is that I want those takeaways to be takeaways that the readers themselves get to. If you read this story, there are many, many people who will see her as an enabler to somebody who just should not be president again, who maybe shouldn't have been president at all. And then there are people who read this story and think she's uniquely equipped to help this person who might be president again. There's the feedback I've gotten since it runs the gamut. And that's not out of the ordinary, actually, just because of how sort of split we are politically. People read the same thing in totally different ways. But this maybe in particular, there's something about her and her current role that made readers see this story as everything from a hit piece to a fluff piece, to a beat sweetener, and that's fine. What it tells me is that I found some useful and illuminating middle ground. She can't quite be pegged in simple, purely partisan ways. And what I guess I hope the takeaway would be is that readers would come away from that story thinking of her a little bit more as a full person, as we all are, right? Rather than simply an enabler or a helper, a political advisor who's great or awful. She is, as we all are, a mixture of things for a mixture of reasons. And so I would hope the takeaway is a little bit more nuanced than we sometimes see in the current political and politics adjacent discourse.
You have a lot of quotes in this article from people like Ron Littlepage, John Payton, Democrats in Tallahassee who worked for her and worked against her. But one quote that I wanted to end the show with actually comes from this gentleman on the right, which I think sums it up more than any other quote that I read. Mike Hightower wrote, "She's like fog. You know it's there, but you can't get your hands around it." And boy, that sure does wrap it up, Mr. Hightower. Thank you very, very much. Next week, we are approaching the 44th year of the Jacksonville Jazz Festival over Memorial Day weekend. So we're going to go back in time with my other Mike friend, Mr. Tolbert, who organized the first jazz festival back in those days. Never knew that. He was only 10 at the time. I'm sorry, he was 50 at the time. I'm sorry, there was a misprint on that. Yeah. Anyhow, we're going to have some terrific stories that you're going to be hearing about the old days of the jazz festival, and it's our way of paying tribute to one of the best events that this city throws every single year. So we hope you'll join us for that. Again, our thanks to Michael Kruse, our thanks to the Jacksonville Historical Society and the Jacksonville History Center for their continued support of this podcast. We'll see you all again next week. Thanks for joining us.
Mike's on Mike with Mike Tolbert, Mike Hightower, and Mike Miller can be found on your favorite podcasting platform, Facebook, and YouTube. Visit the website at mikesonmike.com. Join us next time for more conversation with Mike's on Mike.